Rain fell in heavy sheets across the Neridian Memorial grounds, each droplet striking the obsidian markers with a soft percussion that mimicked the sound of distant footfalls. Commander Rick Carter stood motionless on the rain-soaked hill, his combat armor glistening with moisture, eyes fixed on the simple stone marker before him. The alien metropolis sprawled below its once gleaming towers, now pockmarked with the scars of recent conflict. 3 weeks since the Coalition Keldari War had officially ended, and still the city bore open wounds, much like the man who stood vigil above it. The rain coursed down Rick's face, mingling with tears he refused to acknowledge. 20 years of military service had taught him to compartmentalize grief, to lock it away in some distant chamber of his mind, while duty carried his body forward. But here, alone, with only ghosts for company, that chamber had finally burst open. "They turned out for you," he whispered, trailing calloused fingers over the alien script etched into the stone. The entire Neridian 3rd Battalion. Even Admiral Thornton came. The marker was simple by human standards, but ornate by Neridian custom, swirling glyphs, inlaid with luminous crystal, that caught what little light penetrated the storm clouds. Around its base, locals had placed offerings, silver medallions, crystalline flowers, that somehow bloomed despite the absence of sunlight, and thin metal strips inscribed with prayers and remembrances in a dozen different languages. All for Anra. All for the alien warrior who had died saving not just Rick's life, but the lives of thousands. In his mind's eye, Rick saw her again, as she had been at the Battle of Neridian Pass. Fierce and determined, her crimson skin gleaming with sweat. Those violet eyes, narrowed in concentration, as she calculated impossible trajectories for their final, desperate counterattack. He remembered her voice, slightly metallic to human ears, but warm with the affection she rarely displayed in public. The passes are their weakness. They cannot defend what they cannot see. She had been right. The Keldari forces, confident in their superior numbers, had never expected an attack from below the ridge. The coalition forces had struck from 3 directions at once, with Anra leading the most dangerous approach up the sheer cliff face the enemy had dismissed as impassable. The battle had turned. The Keldari had retreated. Victory had been declared. And then the rockslide, whether triggered by the enemy's final desperate salvo, or simply by the violence that had shaken the mountainside for days, had come crashing down on Anra's position. Rick had watched helpless from 200 meters away as tons of shattered stone buried the woman he loved. He had led the frantic rescue effort, personally digging with his bare hands when machinery proved too slow. He had found her crushed communicator, her shattered helmet. But her body had been carried away by the subterranean river, exposed by the landslide. "I failed you," Rick said, his voice barely audible above the rainfall. His fingers curled into a fist against the stone. "Forgive me, Anra. I should have been there, should have predicted." A gentle hand came to rest on his shoulder. Rick's combat instincts took over before conscious thought could form. He spun, drawing his sidearm in one fluid motion, dropping into a defensive crouch. The weapon came up targeted, and then froze along with every muscle in Rick's body. Standing before him, hands still outstretched, was Anra. Her red-skinned features were unmistakable, the slight ridge along her brow, the luminous violet eyes, the silver markings that traced her jawline in complex patterns, denoting her clan and military rank. She wore a battlesuit similar to his own, though of Neridian design, the dark material seemingly absorbing the rainfall, rather than reflecting it. "Have I ever really left you alone, Rick?" Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, that slight metallic resonance underlying the warmth. Rick's weapon trembled in his grip. His mind raced through a catalog of possibilities: hallucination, clone memory, implant, malfunction, grief-induced psychosis. 1,000 explanations, none of which could be the impossible truth, standing before him. "You're dead," he managed at last, voice cracking on the final word. Anra's lips curved in the subtle smile he knew so well, the one she reserved for moments when human behavior particularly perplexed or amused her. Clearly, she said, gesturing to her very solid form, that assessment requires revision. Rain streamed between them, but neither moved. Around them, the memorial grounds remained deserted, the storm having driven away other mourners. I saw the rock slide, Rick said. I found your helmet, your communicator. Both left behind by necessity, Anra replied. Her expression sobered. I cannot explain here. There are eyes and ears even in this place of remembrance. Where have you been? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper, heavy with 3 weeks of grief and guilt. Learning what they did to me, Anra answered. She glanced nervously toward the city below. Will you come with me, Rick? I have quarters nearby where we can speak freely. I will explain everything, how I survived, why I couldn't contact you until now. Her hand extended toward him. But we must move quickly. I wasn't supposed to leave the facility today. Rick looked down at his weapon, still pointed at the woman he had mourned for nearly a month. Slowly, deliberately, he holstered it. Lead the way, he said. They departed the memorial grounds together, 2 shadows moving through rain and mist, leaving behind a grave marker for someone who lived and breathed beside him. The journey through Neridian's war-damaged streets passed in a haze for Rick. He followed Anra mechanically, his military training keeping him alert for threats, while his mind struggled to process her impossible presence. They traveled largely unseen, using back alleys and maintenance corridors, avoiding the busier thoroughfares where Neridian citizens and coalition peacekeepers mingled. Anra's quarters turned out to be an aging apartment complex, tucked between 2 commercial towers on the city's eastern edge. She led him through a side entrance, bypassing what security remained, with a complex series of access codes. The apartment itself was small, and spartanly furnished a single room, with a sleeping platform, basic cooking facilities, and a communications terminal that appeared to have been deliberately disabled. The only personal touch was a small Neridian prayer crystal that rotated slowly in one corner, casting prismatic light patterns across the bare walls. As soon as the door sealed behind them, Rick grabbed Anra by the shoulders, his fingers digging into the material of her battlesuit. Tell me, he demanded, his voice raw. Tell me everything. Anra did not pull away from his grip. Project Phoenix, she said simply. I was its first successful subject. Phoenix. A joint coalition Neridian experimental program. Anra gently removed Rick's hands from her shoulders, moving to the room's single window to ensure the privacy screens were active. When the rockslide hit, I was mortally wounded but not instantly killed. My emergency teleport beacon activated. Rick shook his head in confusion. The Alliance doesn't have teleport technology. That's theoretical at best. For humans, yes. The Neridians have been developing it for military extraction purposes. It remains highly experimental and imperfect. Something in Anra's voice made Rick look more closely at her. She seemed thinner than he remembered, with a new scar visible along her neck just below her jawline. The technology saved my life, but not without cost, she continued. The teleport sheared away parts of me, internal injuries so severe that conventional medicine could not save me. Yet here you stand, Rick said. Because they used Kildari medical technology recovered from captured research facilities. Anra's eyes flashed with something Rick couldn't quite identify. Fear, anger. Neural implants that accelerate healing, enhance strength and reflexes. Technology the Coalition has officially banned as too dangerous for use. The pieces began falling into place. That's why you couldn't contact me. You've been a test subject. A successful integration, Anra corrected with a bitterness Rick had never heard from her before. Healing that should have taken months occurred in days. My physical capabilities now exceed pre-injury levels. I am, by all measurable standards, a miracle of medical science. And the cost, Rick asked quietly. The implant interfaces directly with my neural pathways. It can influence behavior, suggest courses of action, override certain autonomous responses. Her hand unconsciously rose to the scar on her neck. Sometimes I hear it whispering. Whispering what? Commands, protocols, mission parameters. Anra looked away. I was never meant to leave the facility, Rick. Never meant to contact you or anyone from my former life. According to official records, I am dead and buried the perfect candidate for wet work operations requiring plausible deniability. Rick felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. You escaped. Temporarily. I had to see you to warn you. Anra moved closer, lowering her voice despite the privacy screening. The implant technology, it's not just medical. It's control technology. And Project Phoenix isn't building just one operative. They have chambers with dozens of critically wounded soldiers. Coalition Neridian even captured Kildari. An army of the dead, Rick murmured. Outside the chain of command beyond accountability. Precisely. And I? Anra stopped suddenly, her head tilting, as though listening to something Rick couldn't hear. Her expression hardened. We're out of time. They've tracked me. Before Rick could respond, the window exploded inward in a shower of glass and metal fragments. 3 figures in stealth suits burst through the opening, weapons raised. Simultaneously, the apartment door blew inward, admitting 2 more attackers. Rick's combat reflexes took over. He dove for cover behind the nearest piece of furniture, drawing his sidearm and firing in one fluid motion. His shot caught one of the door attackers in the shoulder, spinning them backward. Beside him, Anra moved with impossible speed. She launched herself at the window intruders, her body a blur of motion. Her first strike shattered the lead attacker's faceplate. Her second crushed the throat of another. The third managed to fire a shot that grazed her arm, before her kick sent him flying back through the shattered window. Rick took out the second door attacker with a precision headshot, then rolled to a better position as suppression fire from the hallway chewed through the flimsy barricade. Exit route, he called to Anra, who had taken cover on the opposite side of the room. Service tunnel, she replied, gesturing toward what appeared to be a maintenance hatch in the floor. On my mark. She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she grabbed a broken furniture piece and hurled it across the room with inhuman force. The makeshift projectile slammed into the doorway, momentarily disrupting the incoming fire. In that split-second opening, both Rick and Anra dashed for the hatch. Rick covered their retreat as Anra yanked the hatch open, revealing a narrow utility shaft. She dropped through first with Rick, following seconds later, pulling the hatch closed above them, just as fresh attackers stormed the apartment. They descended rapidly into darkness, the metal rungs of the maintenance ladder cold beneath their hands. Above, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they dropped deeper into Neridian's urban infrastructure. Who were they? Rick asked, when they finally reached the bottom of the shaft, emerging into a dimly lit service tunnel. Project Phoenix security team, Anra replied. They would have been alerted the moment I left the facility perimeter. Rick studied her in the tunnel's meager lighting. She moved differently than he remembered, more fluid, faster, every gesture precisely controlled. And there was something in her eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before. You've changed, he observed quietly. Anra didn't look at him. Yes. The implant makes me better, stronger, faster. She started walking down the tunnel, her footsteps eerily silent. But less myself. Sometimes I feel it pushing against my thoughts, reshaping my priorities. She glanced back at him. It didn't want me to find you, Rick. Coming to the memorial was difficult. Rick followed her, drawing alongside in the narrow passage. Where are we going? Underground. The old industrial sector beneath the financial district. It's been condemned since the initial Kildari bombardment 3 months ago. Few surveillance systems remain functional there. They moved in silence through a maze of service tunnels and abandoned infrastructure, climbing occasionally through access hatches or dropping through maintenance shafts. Rick found himself struggling to keep pace with Anra, whose enhanced physiology allowed her to navigate obstacles with inhuman ease. After nearly an hour of travel, they emerged into a vast cathedral-like space, the remains of some kind of manufacturing facility. Massive machinery stood in silent rows, damaged but not destroyed by the fighting that had taken place above. Anra stopped suddenly, her body tensing. "What is it?" Rick asked, hand moving to his weapon. "Incoming transmission," she said, her voice suddenly flat. "The implant, it's receiving new instructions." Her face contorted in what appeared to be pain. "Override. Protocol 7-3 Alpha." Rick watched in horror as Anra's body went rigid, her eyes glazing over. Her hand moved mechanically to a pouch on her battlesuit, withdrawing a small communication device. "No," she whispered clearly, fighting against her own movements. "Rick, they're taking control." Without hesitation, Rick knocked the device from her hand, crushing it beneath his boot. Anra collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. "It's getting stronger," she gasped. "Each time the override is harder to resist." Rick crouched before her, taking her face in his hands. "How long have you been fighting it?" "Since I woke in the facility." Anra's eyes cleared somewhat, focusing on his face. 3 weeks of constant mental warfare. She reached into another compartment of her suit, removing a small cylindrical device. "Take this." "What is it?" Rick asked, accepting the object. "Neural disruptor. If I lose control completely, if I try to hurt you or return to the facility against my will." Anra's expression was deadly serious. "Use it. It will temporarily deactivate the implant. Possibly kill me in the process, but—" "I'm not killing you," Rick interrupted firmly. "You might have to." Anra gripped his wrist with unnerving strength. "Promise me, Rick. I won't be their weapon. I won't be used to hurt innocents. If it comes to that choice—" "It won't," Rick said, though the disruptor felt heavy in his palm. "We're going to find a way to remove the implant." "Impossible. It's integrated with my central nervous system. Attempting removal would—" "Nothing's impossible," Rick cut her off. "I buried you once already. I'm not doing it again." He pocketed the disruptor. "I know someone who might be able to help. An old contact from the Proxima campaign. Works in a gray market clinic now, specializing in Keldari tech extraction." Anra looked skeptical. "The Coalition would never authorize—" "We're not asking for authorization," Rick said grimly. "We're going off-grid." For the first time since their reunion, something like hope flickered in Anra's eyes. "Then we need to move quickly," she said, rising to her feet. "The security team will regroup, deploy sensor drones. This area won't stay secure for long." Rick nodded, checking his weapon's charge. "Lead the way." Together, they disappeared deeper into the abandoned facility. 2 warriors against an enemy neither had been trained to fight, an enemy burrowed deep within Anra's own mind. The gray market clinic occupied 3 floors of a discrete commercial building at the boundary between Neridian's reconstructed financial district and its still devastated eastern quarter. From the outside, it advertised itself as a wellness center, specializing in cross-species therapeutic adaptations, a euphemism recognized by those who needed services beyond the scope of official medicine. Rick and Anra approached with caution, having spent hours evading security patrols and surveillance networks. Twice they had been forced to hide as Phoenix operative drones swept the area. Once Anra had suffered another episode, the implant attempting to override her consciousness, but had fought back her indomitable will, reasserting control. The clinic's exterior door scanned them both before sliding open, to reveal a sterile white reception area, staffed by an augmented Neridian, whose mechanical arms managed multiple holographic displays simultaneously. "Commander Carter," the receptionist said without looking up from the displays. "Dr. Terrace has been expecting you." Rick tensed. "How?" "Your approach triggered proximity alerts 9 blocks ago," the receptionist explained. "16th floor. The doctor will see you immediately." The elevator ride was silent, both warriors mentally preparing for what might come. Rick found himself studying Anra's reflection in the polished doors, searching for signs of the woman he had known in this enhanced, hardened version that stood beside him. She caught him looking and held his gaze in the reflection, a moment of their old connection briefly resurfacing before the doors slid open. Dr. Eleanor Terrace had not changed since Rick had last seen her during the Proxima campaign. Still tall and angular, with close-cropped silver hair and cybernetic eye replacements that whirred faintly as they focused. She wore a simple white medical smock over matte black body armor, an incongruous combination that somehow suited her dual nature as healer and survivor. "You look terrible, Commander," she greeted Rick. "And you," her cybernetic eyes scanned Anra thoroughly, "should be dead, according to every official record I could access." "We need your help," Rick said simply. "You need a miracle," Terrace corrected, gesturing them toward a heavily shielded examination room. "Phoenix implant integration, if I'm not mistaken. First-generation neural interface with secondary autonomic and endocrine control mechanisms." Anra stiffened. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because you're the third escapee I've seen this month." Terrace sealed the examination room behind them. The other two didn't survive the extraction attempt. A heavy silence filled the room. Rick and Anra exchanged glances. "Show me," Rick finally said. Terrace nodded grimly, activating a wall display that showed medical scans of two different subjects, one human, one Keldari. Both featured the same distinctive lattice-like structure woven throughout their central nervous systems. The implant establishes primary connections to the brainstem spinal column and adrenal system, Terrace explained clinically. Secondary filaments extend throughout the peripheral nervous system. Its brilliant design almost organic in its integration approach. "Can you remove it?" Anra asked directly. Terrace's cybernetic eyes whirred as they focused on her. "I can try. None of my previous patients survived the procedure. The implant resists extraction, almost as though it has a self-preservation instinct." "But there's a chance," Rick pressed. "A slim one." Terrace moved to examine Anra more closely, using handheld scanning equipment. "Your physiology might provide advantages my previous subjects lacked. Neridian neural pathways have greater regenerative capacity than human or Keldari ones." "What would you need?" Anra asked. "Time, equipment, and a guarantee that Phoenix operatives won't storm my clinic halfway through the procedure." Terrace looked pointedly at Rick. "I'm guessing you didn't exactly sign her out with proper authorization." "We're being hunted," Rick confirmed. "But I can establish a perimeter, buy you the time you need. I'll need at least 4 hours for the preliminary work, another 2 for the extraction itself." Terrace turned back to her equipment. "And even then, success is far from guaranteed." "What are the risks?" Anra asked quietly. "Death, brain damage, permanent paralysis." Terrace's voice was matter-of-fact. "Or the implant could fully activate its defense protocols, effectively wiping your original consciousness and replacing it with whatever programming Phoenix has installed." "Is that what happened to the others?" Rick asked. "The human subject died on the table massive neural hemorrhage when the implant severed its connections, rather than be removed." Terrace's expression darkened. "The Keldari survived the procedure but emerged changed. Personality completely erased. Just an empty vessel awaiting instructions." Anra's hand moved unconsciously to the scar on her neck. "If that happens to me—" "It won't," Rick interrupted firmly. "But if something goes wrong—" He patted the pocket containing the neural disruptor she had given him. Anra nodded understanding, passing between them. "I'll begin preparations," Terrace said, moving toward an adjacent laboratory. "Commander, I suggest you secure the perimeter. My regular security team is adequate for routine clinic defense, but they're not equipped to handle Phoenix operatives." As Terrace left, Rick turned to Anra, who had grown unnaturally still. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. "No." Anra's voice was resolute. "But Rick, there's something you should know." She reached for his hand, guiding it to rest against her abdomen. "The Phoenix doctors, they ran extensive tests. Fertility assessments were part of the program parameters." Rick looked at her in confusion, then understanding dawned. "Are you saying—" "Our last night together before the Battle of Neridian Pass." Anra's expression softened for the first time since their reunion. "I'm carrying your child, Rick. The implant has been sustaining the pregnancy despite the trauma my body endured. The revelation hit Rick like a physical blow. A child. Their child. A human Neridian hybrid rare, but not unprecedented in the years since first contact. A family he had never dared hope for in the midst of war. "All the more reason to get that thing out of you," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll build a life away from all this, somewhere peaceful. First, we have to survive," Anra reminded him, practical as always. Rick nodded, drawing his weapon and checking its charge once more. "I'll secure the perimeter. You stay with Terrace, do whatever she needs to prepare." "Rick." Anra caught his arm as he turned to leave. For a moment her face showed a vulnerability he recognized from before the implant, before her death. "If this doesn't work..." He silenced her with a kiss, brief but fierce. "It will work, and afterward we'll disappear. The Coalition Phoenix, all of it, they can continue without us." The determination in his eyes must have convinced her, for she nodded once and released his arm. "Go. I'll be ready when you return." Rick moved through the clinic with the methodical precision of a veteran soldier, assessing defensive positions, identifying vulnerabilities, establishing fallback points. The clinic's security systems were impressive for a civilian facility, but inadequate against a dedicated Phoenix strike team. He requisitioned equipment from Dr. Terrace's reluctant head of security: signal jammers, motion sensors, tactical barriers. Using his command codes, which might already have been revoked, but were worth trying, he accessed Coalition peacekeeping frequencies, confirming his suspicions. A specialized retrieval team had been deployed to the Eastern District with orders to recover sensitive Coalition property. They were coming, perhaps an hour away, no more. Rick set to work with grim efficiency, rigging improvised neural inhibitors at key entry points, devices that would temporarily disrupt the enhanced capabilities of Phoenix operatives without permanently harming them. He established choke points in corridors, rerouted power systems to create emergency lockdown protocols. When he returned to the examination room, he found Anra already sedated on the operating table with Dr. Terrace and two assistants preparing specialized extraction equipment. "We have less than an hour," Rick informed Terrace. "Phoenix retrieval team is inbound." "Not enough time," Terrace said without looking up from her work. "The preliminary neural mapping alone requires..." "Then work faster," Rick cut her off. "Or figure out a way to move her, because in 60 minutes, this place will be a war zone." Terrace's cybernetic eyes narrowed. "Moving her now would kill her. The neural suppressants are tailored specifically to isolate the implant while maintaining vital functions. Outside this controlled environment..." A distant explosion interrupted her, the percussion rattling instruments on nearby trays. "Scratch that," Rick said grimly. "They're here now." Dr. Terrace cursed under her breath, hands moving with enhanced speed over her equipment. "Get me 15 minutes. I've isolated the primary control node of the implant. If I can deactivate it properly, we might still have a chance." Rick drew his weapon. "You've got 10, he said, moving toward the door. "Make them count." The clinic erupted into chaos as Phoenix operatives breached the lower floors. Alarms blared, security shutters slammed into place, and the sounds of weapon fire echoed through the building. Rick's improvised defenses slowed the assault, but couldn't stop it entirely. He took position in the corridor outside the operating room, using structural support columns for cover. The first wave of attackers, 4 operatives in full tactical gear, encountered his neural inhibitor field and staggered their enhanced reflexes, momentarily failing them. Rick took advantage of their disorientation, dropping 2 with precision shots before the others regained enough control to return fire. A fusillade of energy pulses forced him back behind cover, the column protecting him beginning to disintegrate under sustained fire. Rick activated a second defensive measure, an electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disabled the attacker's weapons and communication systems. In the momentary silence that followed, Rick heard the elevator at the corridor's far end open. A single figure stepped out, not wearing tactical gear like the others, but a simple Coalition officer's uniform with director's insignia. "Commander Carter," the man called out. This has gone far enough. Rick recognized the voice immediately. Director Harmon. I'm disappointed in you, Carter, Harmon said, walking calmly past his disabled operatives without a glance. 20 years of exemplary service and now this abetting the escape of coalition property, assaulting security personnel, illegal use of military resources. She's not property, Rick growled. She's a person. A coalition officer who nearly died serving the Alliance. She did die, Commander. Officially. What emerged from Project Phoenix is something new, something that belongs to us. Harmon stopped several meters away, hands clasped casually behind his back. But I'm not unsympathetic to your situation. The emotional attachment you developed during your joint assignment was well documented. You've been watching us all along, Rick realized, even before the Battle of Neridian Pass. Of course, two of our most effective cross-species operatives. Your partnership was a valuable case study. Harmon took another step forward. Let me make you an offer, Commander. Surrender now, return the subject to custody, and I'll ensure you're treated leniently. Discharge, rather than court-martial. Perhaps even a consulting position with Project Phoenix, where you could continue to work with the subject under controlled conditions. Her name is Anra, Rick said through gritted teeth, and she's carrying my child. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Harmon's face before his professional mask reasserted itself. All the more reason to return her to proper medical supervision. The Phoenix medical facilities are the only ones equipped to monitor and maintain such a unique pregnancy. Rage boiled through Rick's veins, but he forced himself to remain calm to think strategically. Behind him, Dr. Terrace was working against time to save Anra and their unborn child. Every second he kept Harmon talking was another second bought for her work. What's the real purpose of Project Phoenix? Rick asked. An army of the dead deniable assets for operations the Coalition Council wouldn't authorize. So limited in your thinking, Commander. Harmon smiled thinly. Phoenix is about transcendence. The perfect fusion of biological resilience and technological enhancement. The next stage in directed human evolution. With you deciding who evolves and who doesn't. Someone must guide the process. Harmon's expression hardened. Enough talk. The subject is coming with us along with whatever data Dr. Terrace has gathered from her examination. The neural implant contains classified Keldari intelligence that could prove vital to Coalition security. What intelligence? Rick demanded. Intercepted during the Battle of Neridian Pass. A Keldari stellar destabilizer primed and targeting Vis Prime. Harmon's eyes narrowed. 5 days, Commander. 5 days until they destroy a planet housing 8 million Coalition citizens. The implant contains the coordinates access codes and deployment schedule. Rick felt his blood run cold. Vis Prime. A central Coalition world home to one of the largest mixed-species populations in Alliance space. The operating room door slid open behind him. It's done, Dr. Terrace announced. Primary control node deactivated. The extraction can wait until we're in a more secure location. Harmon's expression darkened. You've damaged Coalition property, Dr. Terrace. There will be consequences. I've saved a patient, Terrace corrected, unfazed. Your precious data is still intact, just no longer capable of overriding her autonomous neural functions. A tense silence fell over the corridor. Rick kept his weapon trained on Harmon mind, racing through options. Finally, he spoke. A compromise, Director. Anra and I will analyze the Keldari intelligence, formulate a counterstrike plan. We've both fought the Keldari longer than anyone in Phoenix. We know their tactical patterns, their weaknesses. Under Phoenix supervision, of course, Harmon said. No, Rick's voice was iron. Independent operation. We deliver results, you leave us alone afterward. All records of Project Phoenix's involvement with Anra erased. As far as the Coalition is concerned, she survived her injuries through conventional means. Ridiculous, I couldn't possibly... 5 days, Director, Rick reminded him. How long would it take to bring another Phoenix operative up to speed on Keldari tactical analysis? How many millions will die while you're training a replacement team? Harmon's jaw tightened. 3 days. You have 3 days to deliver actionable intelligence on the destabilizer. After that, regardless of outcome, the subject returns to Phoenix custody for full debriefing and implant assessment. Her name is Anra, Rick repeated, and will need transportation equipment and access to Coalition tactical databases. Done. Harmon produced a small communication device. I'm transmitting coordinates for a secure forward operating base. Report there in 6 hours. Everything you need will be waiting. His eyes narrowed. Don't disappoint me, Commander. The Coalition has long memories for those who betray its interests. With that final warning, Harmon turned and walked back toward the elevator, stepping over his still-recovering operatives without acknowledgement. When he was gone, Rick lowered his weapon shoulders, slumping with the release of tension. "Did you mean it?" Dr. Terrace asked quietly from the doorway. "About delivering the intelligence?" "Yes," Rick said, turning to face her. "But not the way Harmon expects. How's Anra?" "Recovering. The primary node deactivation was successful, but the implant remains integrated with her nervous system. She'll retain the enhanced physical capabilities, but without the external control mechanisms." Terrace's expression grew serious. "She'll need the full extraction eventually, Commander. I've only bought you time." "Time is all we need," Rick said. 3 days later, aboard the Coalition vessel, Concordia, Rick stood at the viewport, watching the distant stars. Behind him, Anra sat cross-legged on the cabin floor, eyes closed in meditation, fighting the tremors that occasionally shook her body, after effects of the implant's partial deactivation. "The withdrawal symptoms are decreasing," she observed, without opening her eyes. "Dr. Terrace's neural suppressants are working." Rick turned from the viewport. "Another day and you should be stabilized enough for the full extraction procedure. Assuming we survive our meeting with the stellar destabilizer." Anra opened her eyes, rising fluid from her seated position. "I've analyzed the final data packet. The Keldari weapon is exactly where the implant intelligence indicated, orbiting the fourth moon of Vis Prime, disguised as a mining platform. And the access codes. Valid according to the simulation framework. We can approach unchallenged if we use the Keldari transponder signatures stored in the implant data." Rick nodded, moving to the cabin's tactical display. "The weak point remains the cooling infrastructure. Keldari stellar weapons generate enormous heat during the charging sequence heat that must be vented through these conduits." He highlighted a section of the schematic. "Which will be heavily guarded," Anra pointed out. "But not against a radiation-suited maintenance team." Rick pulled up another file. "According to the intelligence, the weapon is currently in Stage 2, charging the phase requiring the most intensive cooling system maintenance due to radiation buildup." Anra studied the display thoughtfully. "A 2-person infiltration team could access the primary cooling junction through these service tunnels. Properly timed explosive charges would trigger a catastrophic overload. Destroying the weapon before it can fire," Rick finished. "And likely killing anyone aboard," Anra added quietly. Rick's expression hardened. "They're targeting 8 million civilians, Anra. Coalition Neridian Keldari refugees' families who had nothing to do with this war." "I wasn't objecting," she clarified. "Merely ensuring we understand the full implications of our actions." Her hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen. "Especially now that we have more than ourselves to consider." Rick's expression softened as he moved to stand before her. "The Coalition medical officer confirmed it. The pregnancy is stable despite the implant deactivation." "Yes," though he was quite perplexed by my presence given my official status as deceased. A small smile touched Anra's lips. "According to his scans, we're having a daughter." The news struck Rick with unexpected force. The concrete reality of their child, a daughter growing within Anra, despite everything they had endured. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond war and covert operations, a home somewhere peaceful. A family built across the boundaries of species and planets. The moment passed quickly. First, they had a mission to complete, a weapon to destroy, millions of lives to save. "Director Harmon is expecting our report in 6 hours," Rick said, returning to the tactical display. We'll give him the intelligence he wants, the destabilizer's location, defensive capabilities, crew complement. Everything except our planned method of approach. He'll send a Phoenix team, Anra observed, who will arrive too late to find anything but debris. Rick's voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. By then, we'll be gone, disappeared into the border worlds, where neither Coalition nor Keldari influence reaches. And my implant. We make one final stop at Dr. Terrace's new clinic on Proxima Station. She's already preparing for the extraction procedure. Rick took Anra's hands in his. Then we start over. No more wars, no more Phoenix, no more neural implants whispering commands. You're certain Harmon will honor the agreement? Anra asked skeptically. No, Rick admitted. Which is why we'll leave him a parting gift, evidence of Project Phoenix distributed to secure data caches across Coalition space. If anything happens to us, if he tries to hunt us down, the Coalition Council learns about their illegal experimental program. Anra nodded approvingly. Mutually assured destruction. I prefer to think of it as aggressive negotiation. Rick squeezed her hands gently. But first, we have a stellar destabilizer to destroy. Anra's eyes met his determination, matching his own. Then let's begin. The approach to the Keldari weapon installation proceeded exactly as planned, almost suspiciously. So Rick thought as their unmarked shuttle drifted toward the disguised platform. Using the transponder codes extracted from Anra's implant, they had passed through 3 separate security checkpoints without challenge. They wore standard radiation maintenance suits, their identities concealed behind reflective faceplates. The massive weapon platform loomed before them, its true purpose disguised beneath mining equipment and cargo containers. Only subtle details betrayed its actual function: the precision alignment of what appeared to be communication arrays, the distinctive energy signatures leaking from supposedly routine power systems. Final approach, Rick murmured into his suit's comm system. Docking procedure initiated. Beside him, Anra monitored the sensor readings. No alert status changes. They're accepting our credentials. The shuttle's automated systems guided them into a maintenance bay on the platform's underside. As the docking clamps engaged and atmosphere flooded the chamber, Rick performed a final equipment check: explosive charges, backup weapons, neural dampeners in case Anra's implant attempted to reassert control despite Dr. Terrace's deactivation. Remember, he said, as they prepared to exit the shuttle, we have 40 minutes to reach the primary cooling junction, place the charges, and return to the shuttle before detonation. Anra nodded, her movements precise, despite the bulky radiation suit. The implant's schematics indicate minimal personnel in the maintenance tunnels. Most Keldari crew members are stationed in the Weapon Control Center on the opposite side of the platform. They move through the airlock into the maintenance bay, their false credentials passing yet another automated security scan. The interior of the platform matched the intelligence exactly: utilitarian corridors designed for efficiency rather than comfort, with Keldari script marking access points and warning of radiation hazards. Following the memorized route, they navigated deeper into the facility, occasionally passing Keldari maintenance workers, who paid them little attention, just another radiation team performing routine checks in a high-risk environment. 20 minutes into the infiltration, they reached the access point for the primary cooling tunnels. Rick overrode the security panel, using codes from the implant data, while Anra stood watch, her enhanced senses, alert for any approach. The heavy access door slid open to reveal a narrow service tunnel, bathed in the distinctive blue glow of Keldari radiation shielding. The air temperature dropped noticeably as they entered their suit sensors, registering the extreme cold used to balance the weapon's extraordinary heat output. Radiation levels rising, Anra reported as they proceeded deeper. Still within suit tolerances, but increasing faster than the schematics indicated. They've accelerated the charging sequence, Rick realized grimly. The weapon could be ready to fire sooner than we anticipated. They moved with greater urgency, following the cooling conduits toward the central junction. The tunnel gradually widened, opening into a vast chamber, dominated by a massive cylindrical structure, the primary cooling assembly. Supercooled liquid flowed through transparent conduits, glowing with an eerie phosphorescence as it absorbed heat from the weapon's core. "Perfect," Rick said, removing the explosive charges from his equipment pack. "We place the charges at these junction points." He indicated 3 critical connections where multiple conduits merged, and the resulting cascade failure will trigger a core overload. They worked efficiently, Rick placing the charges, while Anra configured the detonation sequence. The primary cooling junction was mercifully deserted, the extreme radiation and cold, making it a place even Keldari engineers avoided when possible. "Charges set," Rick confirmed. "Detonation timer synchronized. 30 minutes until critical failure," Anra added, checking the final connections. "We need to move." She stopped suddenly, head tilting in that now familiar gesture that indicated the implant was active. "Anra." Rick moved toward her hand, reaching for the neural dampener. "Incoming transmission," she said, her voice tight with the effort of resistance. "The implant, it's receiving new data. Combat alert status throughout the facility. They know we're here." "How?" Rick demanded. "Our credentials were perfect, the approach precisely according to protocol." "It wasn't us," Anra said, struggling visibly against the implant's influence. "It's Phoenix. Director Harmon deployed a team to ensure we couldn't complete the mission independently. Their approach triggered the facility's deep space sensors." Rick cursed under his breath. "We need to move, now, back to the shuttle before—" An alarm blared throughout the facility, the harsh Keldari warning tones echoing down the service tunnels. Red emergency lighting replaced the standard illumination, casting everything in a blood-tinged glow. "Too late," Anra said grimly. "Facility lockdown initiated. All exits sealed." Rick quickly assessed their options. "The charges are set. The overload is inevitable now. We need an alternative exit strategy." Anra closed her eyes briefly, allowing the implant's tactical analysis to flow through her consciousness without surrendering to its control directives. "Maintenance shaft 37C. It leads to an external access port designed for emergency cooling system repairs. We can bypass the lockdown protocols there." "Distance: 300 meters. Through 2 security checkpoints, likely now manned by armed response teams." Rick checked his weapon's charge. "Then we fight our way through. 25 minutes until detonation. Move." They abandoned subtlety, racing back through the tunnels, toward the indicated maintenance shaft. At the first junction, they encountered a 3-member Keldari security team. Rick dropped into a firing stance while Anra used her enhanced speed to close the distance, disabling 2 opponents before they could properly aim their weapons. Rick's precise shot took down the 3rd. "First checkpoint ahead," Anra warned, as they approached a heavily reinforced security door. "Elevated life signs on the other side, at least 6 armed personnel." Rick retrieved a compact device from his equipment pack, one of the neural inhibitors he had designed for the clinic defense. "This should work on Keldari neural patterns as well as Phoenix ones. When I activate it, we'll have approximately 8 seconds before their systems adapt." Anra nodded her understanding, positioning herself beside the door. "On your mark. Now." Rick activated the device and slapped the door release simultaneously. As the barrier slid open, the Keldari security team on the other side staggered, their movements suddenly uncoordinated as the neural inhibitor disrupted their synaptic functions. Rick and Anra burst through, targeting the disoriented guards with ruthless efficiency. Within the promised 8 seconds, all 6 lay incapacitated or dead. 18 minutes remaining, Anra reported as they continued their flight. The second checkpoint proved more challenging, a full squad of elite Keldari commandos in radiation-resistant combat armor. The neural inhibitor had limited effect on their shielded nervous systems. "Cover me," Anra said suddenly, her voice taking on a metallic quality Rick recognized from her battle commands during the war. Before he could respond, she had launched herself into the midst of the Keldari squad, moving with inhuman speed and precision. Rick provided suppressing fire, creating openings for Anra's devastating close-quarters attacks. He watched in awe and trepidation as she employed capabilities clearly enhanced by the implant, anticipating enemy movement striking with force. No Neridian could naturally generate ignoring injuries that would have incapacitated her before. When the last commando fell, Anra stood momentarily still, among the bodies breathing heavily. Blood, hers and theirs, stained her radiation suit. Anra Rick approached cautiously. She turned to him, and for a heart-stopping moment he didn't recognize the look in her eyes, cold, calculating, inhuman. Then she blinked, and awareness returned. "I'm still here," she assured him, her voice once again her own. "But we need to move. Maintenance shaft 37C is just ahead." The shaft proved to be a narrow vertical tunnel, leading to an external access port. They ascended rapidly, the climb made easier by the facility's reduced gravity environment. 14 minutes remained when they reached the port, a heavy airlock designed for exterior repairs. "The shuttle is on the opposite side of the facility," Rick observed, as they prepared the airlock for activation. "We'll need to spacewalk around the exterior." "The radiation suits have limited thruster capability," Anra confirmed. "Enough for exterior navigation, though not for long-range travel." The airlock cycled atmosphere venting as the exterior door prepared to open. Rick and Anra activated their suits' magnetic boots and thruster packs, bracing for exposure to vacuum. When the door slid aside, they stepped out onto the facility's external hull and froze at the sight before them. A Phoenix assault shuttle hovered less than 100 meters away, its weapons trained directly on their position. Through the forward viewport, Rick could clearly see Director Harmon himself, flanked by Phoenix operatives. "Predictable to the end, Commander." Harmon's voice came through on their communication frequency. "Did you really think we wouldn't anticipate your plan? That we wouldn't track your shuttle's approach? That we wouldn't be monitoring the implant's transmissions despite Dr. Terrace's modifications?" Rick and Anra exchanged glances through their faceplates. 10 minutes until detonation. "The weapon is already set to overload," Rick replied. "Nothing you can do will stop that now." "Perhaps not," Harmon conceded. "But I can still recover what belongs to the Coalition. Specifically the subject and her implant, along with the child she carries. A human Neridian hybrid with prenatal exposure to the most advanced neural enhancement technology in known space. Quite the scientific opportunity." Rage surged through Rick, but Anra's hand on his arm steadied him. "What do you want, Director?" she asked calmly. "Come aboard my shuttle now, and Commander Carter lives. Resist, and we open fire." Harmon's voice was matter-of-fact. "Those radiation suits won't survive a direct hit from our weapon systems." 8 minutes until detonation. Not enough time for Harmon to disarm the charges, even if he knew their exact location. But plenty of time for him to escape with Anra before the facility exploded. "Don't do it," Rick said on their private channel. "He'll kill me anyway once he has you." "I know," Anra replied softly. "Trust me." To Harmon, she said, "Lower your weapons first. Allow Commander Carter to return to our shuttle. Then, I'll surrender." "You're not in a position to negotiate," Harmon responded coldly. "I'm standing on a facility rigged to explode in less than 8 minutes, Anra countered. "I believe that gives me considerable leverage, Director." A tense silence followed. Finally, Harmon spoke again. "Very well. We're powering down weapons. Commander Carter may return to your shuttle, which we will disable after departure, to ensure it remains here when the facility detonates." "Acceptable," Anra said before Rick could object. The Phoenix shuttle's weapon systems visibly powered down. Anra turned to Rick. "Go," she said on their private channel. "Return to the shuttle. Prepare for emergency departure." "I'm not leaving you," Rick insisted. "You must. For our daughter." Anra's voice softened. "The implant is still partially active, Rick. I can use it one last time to save both of us. But I need you at the shuttle controls." 6 minutes until detonation. Rick hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll be waiting for you." Using his thruster pack, he pushed away from the facility, maneuvering across the void toward their docked shuttle. Behind him, he watched as Anra began moving toward the Phoenix vessel, her movements deliberately slow to buy him time. The moment Rick reached the maintenance bay airlock, he overrode the lockdown protocols, using emergency codes cycling through as quickly as the system allowed. Inside, he raced to the shuttle cockpit, initializing launch sequences and bypassing safety protocols. Through the viewport, he could see the Phoenix shuttle maintaining position near Anra's floating form. 4 minutes until detonation. Suddenly, Anra's body convulsed. Even from a distance, Rick could see her suit's thrusters firing in an erratic pattern. On the communication channel, he heard Harmon's voice rise in alarm. "What's happening? Stabilize her, get a tractor lock immediately." The Phoenix shuttle maneuvered closer to Anra's thrashing form. 3 minutes until detonation. Then, with explosive force, Anra's thruster pack detonated a small but precisely targeted blast that damaged the Phoenix shuttle's forward sensor array and propulsion system. The vessel lurched, temporarily disabled. In the same moment, Anra activated her suit's emergency propulsion, a one-time boost designed for life-threatening situations. The burst launched her directly toward the maintenance bay, where Rick waited. "Open the exterior doors." Her voice came through the communication channel, strained but triumphant. "Now!" Rick slammed the override controls, forcing the maintenance bay's exterior doors to cycle open, despite lockdown protocols. Anra's form shot through the opening seconds before safety systems would have prevented her entry. "Go!" she shouted as she crashed onto the deck, rolling to absorb the impact. "Launch now!" 2 minutes until detonation. Rick engaged the shuttle's engines at maximum thrust, tearing free of the docking clamps, with a shriek of protesting metal. The small vessel rocketed away from the facility, just as the Phoenix shuttle regained partial control, turning to pursue. "They're locking weapons," Anra reported, dragging herself into the co-pilot's seat, despite visible injuries from her desperate maneuver. "Doesn't matter," Rick replied grimly. "In 60 seconds, this entire sector becomes a debris field." He pushed the shuttle to its structural limits, putting as much distance as possible between them and the doomed weapon platform. Behind them, the Phoenix shuttle had abandoned pursuit, apparently recognizing the imminent danger and seeking its own escape. The detonation, when it came, was strangely beautiful, a silent explosion in vacuum, expanding rings of blue-white energy as the stellar destabilizer's power core overloaded. The shockwave hit their shuttle moments later, sending it tumbling despite Rick's attempts to maintain control. Warning alarms blared throughout the cockpit as systems overloaded. Anra worked furiously at the damage control station, rerouting power and stabilizing critical functions. "Engine core compromised," she reported calmly. "Life support stable, navigation offline." "Beacon," Rick asked, wrestling with the manual controls. "Functional. Emergency distress signal activated." Anra looked up from her console. "We'll be adrift for hours, possibly days, before anyone responds." Rick finally managed to stabilize their tumble, bringing the shuttle into a controlled drift. Through the viewport, the remains of the Keldari weapon facility scattered across space like a new constellation of short-lived stars. Of the Phoenix shuttle, there was no sign, either destroyed in the explosion or escaped beyond sensor range. "Did we get them?" he asked quietly. "Unknown," Anra replied. "But the weapon is destroyed. Vis Prime is safe." She removed her helmet, revealing a face streaked with blood from a cut along her scalp. "And we're alive." Rick released his own helmet, turning to examine her injuries. "The baby." Anra placed a hand on her abdomen, eyes closing briefly as she assessed internal systems with the implant's remaining capabilities. Stable. Protected. Relief washed over Rick as the adrenaline of their escape began to fade. They had destroyed the weapon. They had escaped Harmon, perhaps permanently, if the Phoenix shuttle had been caught in the explosion. They were alive, their child was safe, and they had a future to build. "What did you do back there?" he asked, as he applied medical sealant to the cut on Anra's scalp. "With the implant, I allowed it limited access to my motor functions enough to simulate a neural cascade failure. The thruster pack explosion was improvised." A smile touched her lips. The implant has proven useful at times despite its intentions. Dr. Terrace can remove it completely once we reach Proxima Station, Rick reminded her. Yes. Anra caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. And then we truly begin again. They settled in to wait for rescue the shuttle's emergency systems, maintaining life support, while the beacon broadcast their position. Beyond the viewport, stars shone unchanged, indifferent to the lives saved and lost in the recent conflict. What will we name her? Rick asked, suddenly his hand finding Anra's. Our daughter, Anra, considered the question. In Neridian tradition, we would honor those who came before, perhaps your mother's name. Sarah, Rick said softly. Sarah Carter. A good name, Anra agreed. Though on my world she would carry both our lineages, Sarah Carter Ventel. Even better, Rick smiled. A bridge between worlds like her parents. They fell into comfortable silence, hands intertwined as the shuttle drifted through the void, two warriors who had defied death itself to forge a future together. 6 months later, Rick and Anra stood once more on the rain-soaked hill of the Neridian Memorial Grounds. The weather was eerily similar to the day of their reunion, heavy clouds releasing a steady downpour that transformed the landscape into a shifting watercolor of greens and grays. The stone marker remained, though its purpose had changed. No longer a grave for a fallen warrior, it now served as a monument to both Rick and Anra, officially recognized for their crucial role in preventing the Keldari stellar destabilizer attack. The truth of Project Phoenix, the implant and Director Harmon's machinations, remained classified, buried beneath layers of Coalition security protocols. Harmon himself had survived the weapon facility's destruction, though his career had not. The evidence Rick and Anra had distributed to secure data caches had been enough to remove him from power without publicly exposing the Phoenix program. A political compromise that satisfied no one completely, but prevented further conflict. Anra stood before the marker, her pregnancy now visibly advanced the rounded curve of her abdomen, a stark contrast to the lean warrior who had fought at Rick's side. The implant was gone, successfully removed by Dr. Terrace during a painstaking procedure on Proxima Station. Some of the enhancements remained neural pathways, permanently altered reflexes, faster than standard Neridian baseline, but the control mechanisms, the whispering voice of external authority, had been excised. Strange to visit your own memorial, she observed, tracing the glyphs with fingers no longer driven by hidden directives. Better than the alternative, Rick replied, standing close beside her. Rain beaded on his civilian attire, the combat commander's uniform long since abandoned. They had not fully escaped the Coalition's reach. Their knowledge, their experience, their unique cross-species perspective remained too valuable to release entirely. Instead, they had negotiated new roles, interstellar advisors bridging the approaches of different species in the ongoing reconstruction efforts. Work that allowed them freedom, purpose, and most importantly time to prepare for their daughter's arrival. 3 more weeks according to the medical scan, Anra said, sensing the direction of Rick's thoughts, as she often did. The connection between them had only deepened since the implant's removal, as though something artificial had been replaced by something stronger, more genuine. Are you nervous? Rick asked. About birth? No more than I would be about any critical mission. Anra smiled at the comparison. Though I suspect this will be more challenging than infiltrating a Keldari weapons platform. Rick laughed, the sound carrying across the empty memorial grounds. They had chosen to visit during off hours, specifically to avoid crowds and recognition. Despite their new roles, both preferred privacy, especially as they prepared for this most personal of transitions. I've been thinking, Rick said after a moment, his expression growing serious. About what happens after, where we go from here. The Coalition expects us to remain on Neridian for at least another year, Anra reminded him. The Coalition expects many things. Not all of them come to pass. Rick turned to face her fully. There's a settlement on Valerian Prime far enough from both Coalition and Keldari space to avoid political entanglements. Mixed species population, good educational infrastructure, excellent medical facilities. You've researched this thoroughly, Anra observed, intrigued. I've learned from the best strategic planner I know. Rick smiled briefly before continuing. We could request assignment there as cultural liaisons. The settlement is new enough to need experienced advisors, but established enough to provide stability for a family. A home, Anra said thoughtfully. Something neither of us has truly had since before the war. Something I never expected to have again, Rick admitted. Not until that day in the rain when you touched my shoulder. Anra's hand found his fingers intertwining. A second chance at life, at love, at family. The greatest gift I could imagine, Rick agreed. And perhaps the most human trait of all, refusing to accept endings, always finding another way forward. They stood together in comfortable silence. Rain falling around them, the distant city below, beginning to illuminate as evening approached. Not all their battles were behind them. Anra still, sometimes woke from nightmares of neural control. Rick, from dreams of rock slides and graves. The coalition would never fully relinquish its interest in them. The child they expected would face challenges unique to her mixed heritage. But for this moment on this rain-soaked hill, none of that mattered. They had defied death, overcome control, and forged a connection that transcended species programming and politics. They had saved millions without sacrificing their humanity in the process. To new beginnings, Anra said softly, her free hand resting on her abdomen, where their daughter grew. To new beginnings, Rick echoed, as they turned away from the memorial that no longer marked an ending, but instead commemorated a continuation their story, unbound by death or protocol, moving forward into an uncertain but hopeful future.